Despite a strike that felt like it lasted all year, 2023 was still home to some pretty fantastic movies. 2024 may be a different story, but let's cross that bridge when we come to it. Last week, I ended 2023 on a bit of a negative note with 11 of the worst films I saw that year, but I think it would be fitting to ring in the new year with twofold positive energy. That's why this year I'm going to be talking about not just my top 10, but top 20 movies of 2023. Frankly, there were just a lot of really great films worth talking about, some of which I didn't even get to see. Going by my head now is a list of what I call honorable misses, films I didn't get a chance to catch before year's end. It sucks they have to be left off the list, but I wanted to share these just so I don't get yelled at over why so-and-so didn't make it into the top 20. I also have a list over on my website, martinishot.blog, that ranks every single movie I reviewed this year. So if you want to know how I rank 70 plus 2023 films, be sure to check that out once you're done here. Before we get into the list, here's some honorable mentions, films that just barely missed out on the top 20. First up is They Cloned Tyrone, a super slept on blend of sci-fi and blaxploitation that came out on Barbenheimer Day on Netflix and totally got lost in the shuffle. Definitely worth a watch. James Gunn gave us a pretty satisfying conclusion to his terrific Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy in Volume 3 with heavy emotional moments, especially if you're an animal lover. Next is Asteroid City, perhaps Wes Anderson's most out there and difficult to approach film that has all the eccentricities you'd expect from the director, along with a compelling meditation on the meaning of life and finding purpose in the universe. There's also Evil Dead Rise, which was a lot better than I expected. It definitely does justice to the franchise while still managing to feel relatively fresh and is just a good bloody time. And finally, just barely missing the top 20 is John Wick Chapter 4. Hands down the best action movie of the year, home to some of the most intricate and impressive fight scenes I think I've ever seen. Alright, time to get into the heavy hitters. I'm going to go a little quick through the first 10, then slow it down and get more in depth with the final 10. At number 20, we have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, an animated film that continues the trend Spider-Verse established, which is employing more creative and unique animation styles to better represent the property. The art style has this sketchy, grungy, graffiti-like vibe to it that not only fits the setting of New York, but also the adolescence of the Turtles, which is of course one of the biggest highlights of the film, being the fact that the teenagers actually feel like teenagers, thanks to the remarkable chemistry between the well-casted stars. It's funny, the action is super fluid and well-boarded, and the soundtrack matches the aesthetic very well. This was just a ton of fun. This was definitely an explosive year for film, and before we talk about that one big explosion you're probably expecting, I'd like to turn your attention to one on a smaller scale with number 19, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. A film that at times almost felt dangerous to watch just because of how authentic and grounded everything felt. The ensemble of characters are incredibly compelling due to their different backgrounds and beliefs, united by their desire to dismantle a hazardous pipeline for one reason or another. The build up to the big moment is excruciatingly tense, truly a powder keg of real-world science that can go sideways at any moment. A lot of people compared it to a heist film, and honestly, that's not too far off, except this one has a very compelling message on conservation and activism that I think is super important to the modern day. Number 18 came out near the beginning of the year, and I almost forgot about it, but really, Infinity Pool is pretty hard to forget. The sophomoric outing from Brandon Cronenberg is a darkly fun spin on the Eat the Rich theme, going down a rabbit hole of unique depravity with an incredibly interesting concept. The performances really sell it, with Alexander Skarsgård being incredibly pathetic and Mia Goth being as unhinged as you might expect. It gets pretty uncomfortable at times, but is fully aware of its own absurdity, asking just how far you would go if you knew you wouldn't have to face consequences. Brandon seems to be doing his daddy proud and has a pretty great first name to boot. Number 17 is Bottoms, which really surprised me, not by the fact that it was good and funny, but because of how weird it got. Raunchy teen comedies have kind of run their course, but Bottoms turns the genre on its head by going down a truly absurdist route. The world of the film is pretty fast and loose, filled with turbocharged high school stereotypes and a somewhat shocking indifference to violence and murder. Rachel Sennett and Ayo Edebiri are still some of the funniest up-and-comers in Hollywood, while Marshawn Lynch continues to flex his comedy chops by stealing every scene he's in. This felt like such a breath of fresh air for the genre, and it's definitely one of the funniest movies to come out this year. Soaring its way into number 16 is The Boy and the Heron, the latest film from Studio Ghibli and director Hayao Miyazaki. Now, don't get mad at me for how low this is placed, especially when you see what I put above it. This is certainly a film I'll be thinking about for a while. Even if it didn't blow me away upon my first viewing, I still have a ton of respect for it. Miyazaki is a legend in the twilight of his career who seems to be grappling with leaving the world of film for the next generation. His approach to these internal dilemmas is through a dreamlike odyssey that ponders upon many of Miyazaki's themes like childhood and imagination. Of course, the visuals are gorgeous and blows many other animated films out of the water with just that element alone. I had a lot more to say on why this didn't completely hit with me, which you can check out in my full review linked in the description, but like I said, I'll be thinking about this one for a while, and it just might continue to grow on me in the future. Number 15 is You Hurt My Feelings, a little comedy about unfulfilled dreams and the realization you've been doing the wrong thing all your life. You know, funny stuff. Truth be told, this film just hit home for me a lot more than I was expecting, considering I'm not 50 years old. But I think a lot of the ideas here still ring true no matter what point you're at in your life, like the little lies we tell at what we think is the benefit of the ones we love. It's not afraid to get into those little, seldom spoken about agreements in relationships, and while it's not exactly super powerful or moving, I still think it's a good time. The cast is hilarious and earnest, and overall, I think this could be a great date movie that may or may not start fights. Number 14 is an animated feature that was originally produced by Blue Sky Studios, but upon the company's acquisition by Disney in 2020, the project was delayed for months before eventually being canceled. Thankfully, Annapurna Pictures swooped in to revive the film, eventually releasing it on Netflix this year, and after the kind of year Disney has had, this was a hell of a middle finger to the mouse. The film I'm talking about is Nimona, a sci-fi fantasy film following the companionship between the titular shapeshifter and a disgraced knight. I was a little surprised by how much this film hit me, but in hindsight, it wasn't too difficult to see why. The setting of a futuristic city blended with medieval aesthetics like knights and castles felt refreshingly unique to American animation and was a ton of fun to explore. The animation also leaned into its own style, and even though it did look a little flat at times, it still managed to be super expressive. The story and dynamic between the two main characters manages to be both genuinely funny and actually pretty emotional, tying in a lot of themes like identity and being true to who you are rather than how others see you. No joke, I actually got a little emotional at the end, which is something Disney hasn't really managed to do to me in quite a while. Next up at number 13, we have David Fincher's The Killer, a film that seemed to divide people as much as his last film, Mank. It really seemed like you either liked it or hated it, and I gotta say, I really liked it. The no-name hitman played by Michael Fassbender may seem surface level and one note, and okay, he actually is. But Fincher uses a character like this to poke fun at that alpha grindset culture that has spawned in the past few decades, no thanks in part to interpretations of Fincher's own work. I mean, the first 20 minutes is the killer hyping out how precise and methodical he is, only for him to completely botch his job. Hilarious. The camera work and framing is as pristine as you'd expect from a Fincher film, yet the film isn't afraid to get down and dirty when it calls for it. It's far more meditative than you may think at first, and I absolutely think it deserves an open mind going in. At number 12 is When Evil Lurks. This is probably up there as the most effed up film I saw this year, with an unflinching refusal to let the horrors it presents you be glossed over and played out off screen. There are some genuinely shocking, unnerving scenes that not only made me jump, but also garnered an insane amount of respect and intrigue for me, as I wondered how in the hell they pulled some of these off. The film also has a unique approach to world building, essentially dropping you into a setting of paranormal horrors while asking you to just kind of roll with it without explaining too much. It truthfully gives the story a sense of realism to it, almost like this is happening somewhere off in the world. I do think this leads to the film leaving a bit too many questions left unanswered, but even still, this was a refreshing swing on a possession story that actually managed to be terrifying. And then finally, just missing out on the top 10 is one half of this year's movie theater phenomenon, Barbie. This was such a fun time and such a shock too, as Greta Gerwig was able to take what could have been a thoughtless cash grab meant to sell more products and turn it into a thoughtful, silly, and hilarious film that not only reflects on the doll's impact on the world, but also heavier topics like gender norms and the elements of life that create patriarchal systems that can be harmful to everyone involved. It manages to be both a goofy, violently pink comedy while also finding room to be poignant and mature, captained by two terrific performances from Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling. From top to bottom, this was far better than it had any right to be, earning the title of highest grossing movie of the year and a well-deserved spot on this list. Now time for the big boys, the top 10. Let's go.
Jeff is a pedophile.
At number 10 is May December, the target of much film Twitter discourse over whether or not the film is funny or not. Sure, the film deals with very delicate themes like predatory behavior and the robbing of agency, but that doesn't mean its tone can't match the lunacy of the characters and their beliefs. This can be a very uncomfortable watch as the film dances between a delicate gray area where it asks you not only to be critical of these characters, but understand them for what they are, how their minds work, how they got here, and how they affect others around them. It asks you to view these circumstances through a lens not dominated by black and white, good and evil conjecture, because honestly, that kind of view gets us nowhere when trying to understand why things like this happen. Technically, the film is simplistic, but every bit of simplicity comes with intention. Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore war with each other through probing questions and passive-aggressive answers, while Charles Melton surprises with an incredibly layered, subtle performance that brilliantly captures the thought process and mannerisms of a 30-year-old man who essentially lost the opportunity to be a kid. Its soapy nature might feel off-putting for a film of this subject matter, but like I said, I think it pairs really well to accentuate some of the ridiculous people featured in the film. Top to bottom, this film is so impressive, and with it being on Netflix, it's incredibly easy to access if you're looking to squirm in your seat.
It was all a dream.
Speaking of uncomfortable films, number 9 was one of those films I actually had to turn away from at times because of secondhand embarrassment. This is some cringe comedy at its finest while also having a little something to say about fame. I'm of course talking about Dream Scenario, the latest vehicle for Nicolas Cage to be a little freaking weirdo. The premise of having the same guy appearing in everyone's dreams sounds straight out of an old creepypasta, but what director Christopher Borgli does with the premise is truly unique and echoes current times. The film uses this setup to reflect viral internet fame and how it can happen to anyone, sometimes for seemingly no reason at all. But on the flip side, it also tackles how not everyone is built for the limelight and how quick public perception can change on someone when they've been put on too high of a pedestal. Nicolas Cage juggles a lot of emotions here as the nobody professor that soon becomes an overnight sensation and eventually the most hated man in the world. It's gotta be one of the most pathetic characters I've seen him play, and he does a phenomenal job at making you feel sorry for him, embarrassed for him, yet also aggravated by him as well. I also think this film has some of the most effective editing and camera work this year, often employing erratic cuts and handheld shots that don't exactly call for it to really crank up the uncomfortable nature of each scene. There's even an effective juggling of multiple genres. Sometimes it's a dark comedy, sometimes it's a horror film, sometimes it's a family drama. Yet everything works so well, crafting a hard-to-watch satire that should make everyone rethink their parasocial relationships with people they see on TV or the internet that we really have no actual relationship with. This is probably Cage's best performance since Pig, except this one has a scene where he farts, creams his pants, and then farts again.
Crazy Hand.
Even in a year that feels like it had more misses than hits when it comes to horror, I still managed to be pleasantly surprised by a few entries, like the aforementioned Evil Dead Rise and When Evil Lurks. However, if I had to pick my favorite of the genre this year, that would have to go to the refreshingly Aussie take on the possession genre that is Talk to Me. Made by two YouTuber brothers, Talk to Me managed to take the mostly worn out genre of ghostly possession and turn it into a clever analogy to teen peer pressure and drug use. In the film, an embalmed hand that lets you talk to the dead is the misused monkey's paw that drives our main character Mia to descend into a nightmarish rabbit hole. The hand means different things to different characters. For some, it's a party trick, a social engagement, and an addictive rush you can't find anywhere else. But for Mia, who recently lost her mom, it's a coping mechanism, first pressured onto her, that eventually consumes her because of her inability to address and tackle her grief head on. This is such a cool metaphor that connects the addictive personalities of today's youth, as well as their curiosity and obsession with the macabre. What makes the horror of the film so effective is how genuine all of the characters feel, playing true to form for their generation. Their actions and motivations are often frustrating, but not unlike the irrationality that comes with being a teen. Sophie Wilde absolutely dominates the film as Mia, while the supporting performances are no slackers themselves. Directors Danny and Michael have put a lot of attention into the technicals as well, with playfully haunting camera work and some of the most disgusting sound design I've heard this year. Talk to Me is a perfect example of not exactly reinventing the wheel, but showing you a different way the wheel can be utilized. It's dark, funny, and at its core, poignant, capped off by an absolutely chilling ending. There's already a sequel greenlit by A24, and I can't wait to see what comes from the crazy Ronald McDonald brothers next.
I'm a fire in my laser.
Number 7 also wins the award for the movie that surprised me the most this year. Truth be told, I've been a fan of this series since I was a child, but I honestly believe the IP has hit its peak with its latest film, Godzilla Minus One. The story of Godzilla has been told to us for decades now. Atomic testing leads to the birth of a giant monster that goes on to destroy Japan. It's common knowledge at this point that Godzilla is an obvious reflection of the effects of the atomic bomb, as well as the atomic war hysteria that arose post-World War II. Yet I don't think this metaphor has ever been as effective as it is in -1, which touts one of the best and most human stories that franchise has ever seen. The human characters, which are typically an afterthought in these films, are a highly engaging ensemble of civilians pulling together as a community to take on this gargantuan challenge. It does what not many Godzilla films do, giving its human cast the agency to tackle this problem through camaraderie and ingenuity, not unlike real-life moments of widespread devastation. And Godzilla is absolutely devastation incarnate, maintaining his iconic force of nature aura by leveling cities with animalistic intensity and an atomic breath that has never felt more powerful. And you feel every bit of it thanks to an impressive sense of scale and an on-the-ground eye to look through during the rampage. And with a price tag of somewhere around $15 million, it just makes everything all the more impressive. The kaiju genre can often be tossed aside as a simple, dumb, fun piece of media that's only good for city destruction and rubber monster suits. Yet Godzilla -1 challenges and overwrites that notion, fulfilling the expectations that come with the monster's legacy, as well as heightening those same expectations to elevate this film beyond the others in its genre, making this, in my opinion, the best Godzilla film ever made. It just so happens there was another film that came out this year that runs parallel to a lot of what Godzilla tackles, but in a much different, potentially less abstract kind of way. Yet this doesn't make it any less engaging and enthralling, being one of the director's most unique films and potentially one of his best. This film was a bomb in the most positive of ways, which is film number 6, Oppenheimer. The story of the man behind the weapon that would change the world forever. Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan's latest foray into historical biopic territory that never lets you forget it's a Christopher Nolan joint. His trademark scale and scope are present, yet Nolan trades in the big sweeping set pieces for tight, claustrophobic rooms of men in suits talking. It's a film about a bomb, yes, but the majority of the film is just talking, and yet Nolan finds a way to make each line and each interaction just as wired and explosive. He makes the bold decision to place the focus around those responsible for one of the most devastating acts of war ever, rather than those who actually suffered at the hand of it. And while that might not seem like an important story worth telling, it does offer context on how we came to this moment and how the future is forever changed because of it. Robert J. Oppenheimer is a figure you'll struggle to like, but also hesitate to outright hate. He's a man with all the brilliance in the world, yet lacks the mental fortitude to come to grips with what he's doing until it's far too late. Cillian Murphy gives a career best turn as the titular character, embodying a difficult to pin down protagonist whose principles are as complex as they are ambiguous. But Murphy isn't the only standout, as the film features an ensemble cast of everyone in Hollywood who wasn't already in Barbie, including one of the most refreshing roles Robert Downey Jr. has had in quite a while. The on-paper simplicity of the story is counteracted by striking cinematography, impressive dustings of practical effects, and a split use of black and white and full color to play with historical interpretation. Even with a towering runtime, the film manages to remain engaging nearly throughout, jumping between time periods and perspectives to give us a triumph for Christopher Nolan and one of the best films of the year. Heading into the top 5, it's time to get weird. And there was no weirder, stranger, more batshit film than Ari Aster's latest head trip, Beau is Afraid. Pivoting from straightforward horror to an absurdist black comedy odyssey about a guy with mommy issues and big balls might feel like quite a swing, and it absolutely is. And while I don't think it's a complete knock out of the park, the audaciousness of it has earned all of my respect. Aster has taken his ability to craft tense, anxiety-inducing cinema and cranked that sumbitch up to 11, all while crafting a world so off-kilter and so bizarre that at times you don't know if you should be laughing or screaming. Joaquin Phoenix portrays the titular man who is afraid, taking the character on a journey of trauma, overthinking, abuse, and revelation that is so weird that words can hardly do it justice. Visually, this is Ari's most ambitious film to date, crafting an ever-changing world that can go from absolutely beautiful to nightmarish hellscape when the story calls for it. The offbeat humor and the nutty cast of characters takes us down a winding road paved with manifestations of anxiety due to years and years of emotional manipulation and abuse that honestly feels bad to say is very, very funny. There's just very few films like this being made at this level, and Aster took a hell of a chance with something like this, and I gotta pay him respect. The film also earns the coveted award of Best Film You Should Absolutely Not Show Your Parents, unless they want to get really cool with some weird shit really quick. Coming in at number 4 is both the sweetest and most heart-aching film of the year, which is Past Lives. This debut feature from Celine Song is all about what ifs and whether or not we should entertain those what ifs given the chance. This particular what if happens to be a childhood sweetheart re-entering your life after you both already have established lives. It's a complicated dilemma, one that's tackled with tender honesty and a deeply human approach. The film even traverses the feelings from across the aisle, the trust you have in your partner, and the insecurities that make you question the former. It's proof of the complicated nature of love, how we can define it, and if it can ever truly go away. The film does and says so much without huge emotional swings or grand outbursts of passion. The lead cast of Greta Lee, Teo Yoo, and John Magaro carry the film through its meditations with grounded, realistic honesty that makes the inevitable conclusion all the more heart-wrenching, even though it's the right call for all parties involved. There's not too much more to say except I love this film, and you may just love it too. Just make sure you come to terms with all of those lost loves first. Or don't. Might make a more interesting viewing, honestly.
Thank you, Spider-Man.
It was always going to be hard to outdo perfection, and for me, this film's prior movie was perfection. But this does come pretty darn close, expanding upon what the original film brought in terms of scope and visual splendor. That is film number 3, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. The first Spider-Verse film was a monumental achievement for the medium of animation and a breath of fresh air to one of the most beloved superheroes of all time. Across the Spider-Verse continues to expand upon the story of Miles Morales, a newer Spider-Man struggling to live up to the expectations that comes with the title. This takes him on a multiversal journey that introduces him to a wide array of spider variations and their respective worlds, many of which come with their own unique animation style that continues to challenge conventional norms and embraces the comic book aesthetic. Miles' journey breaks free from the confines of the origin story that did afflict the original film a bit, while also never feeling restricted by the now overused multiverse shtick. And at the end of the day, this film is just a ton of fun, due in part to its ever-expanding web of characters, brilliantly animated action sequences, and an enthralling story that manages to be both emotional and connective to what made Spider-Man an icon in the first place. Superhero fatigue has certainly been afflicting me for a few years now, but more films like this could definitely be the cure.
You just blowing from Stupid Town?
Coming in at number 2 is a devastating piece of film from one of our greatest directors. Martin Scorsese may just have a bright future ahead of him if he keeps delivering incredible films like Killers of the Flower Moon. Marty is certainly not new to this brand of rodeo, yet this certainly feels incredibly introspective to the genre his work often populates. It's an examination of evil, greed, and complacency that can be spawned through ignorance and apathy, focusing on a very real and very abhorrent crime. The film is a technical marvel, and at 3 hours long should not flow as well as it does. Yet it's hard to look away when you have magnetic performances from Leonardo DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro that manage to make you laugh, make you cry, and absolutely piss you off. Having DiCaprio's incompetent and morally vacant Ernest as the protagonist may seem like a disservice to the people who actually suffered from this tragedy, but Scorsese masterfully utilizes the perpetrator as a window into how terrible things aren't always born out of simple evil, but stupid complacency and spineless ethics. Truthfully, the film holds up many different mirrors to reckon with, including our digestion of true crime, which can dehumanize and delegitimize actual victims, and Scorsese himself, whose work has potentially sparked those flames even if it were unintentional. On a more fundamental level, these 3 hours managed to fly by thanks in part to an ever-engaging script, intelligent editing, and too many standout performances to count. For me, this is a near-perfect film and potentially one of Scorsese's most important films of the last few years, whether or not you agree with his approach to portraying this tragedy. It's a masterclass from one of the greatest directors of all time and is easily one of the best films of 2023. But what is my number 1? Well, I can't wait to tell you about it.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
Before I go into my number 1 film, let's just remember that lists like this are all pretty arbitrary. How do you rank 70 plus films of differing approaches and genres against one another, and how do you know you've made the right choice? Well, I really don't, and honestly, these rankings could shift in a year, month, or hell, even when I start editing this, which would absolutely suck. But for now, I want to give my number 1 seat to a simple, grounded, human film that I couldn't stop thinking about after I saw it. My number 1 film of 2023 is The Holdovers. Out of all the films I saw this year, this one just seemed to scream movie at me. There's something so particular, so intentional in its style, production, and writing that just made me feel something I only feel once in a blue moon. Everything here just comes together in an insanely enjoyable and impactful way. The performances are stellar, with Paul Giamatti's crotchety Professor Paul Hunnam, Divine Joy Randolph's quietly aching Mary Lamb, and complete and total newcomer Dominic Sessa just absolutely knocking it out of the park as troubled youth Angus Tully. The script is hands down my favorite of 2023, packing an emotional and literary intelligence that never talks down to you or asks too much of you. It's consistently hilarious, capturing a rhythm of comedy that feels like it's gone and left us decades ago, while at the same time bottling emotional moments straight out of melodrama that just absolutely hit me. The presentation of the film is simple yet effective, adopting a classic film look that works for both the setting as well as the entire aura emanating from the incredible script. It's one of those movies I honestly think you could show anyone from any type of generation or genre appeal, and they'll manage to find something they like from it. It's approachable, but not in a way that feels factory generated or insincere. This is an incredibly sincere film, both to the human experience and to the realm of film. It made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me want to start studying ancient Greece. All in all, top to bottom, this is just a fantastic film I've already revisited a few times, will definitely be recommending to everyone I know, and is my favorite film of 2023. Whew, that was a long one, but if you're still here, thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said before, if you want to see my complete ranking of all the films I saw in 2023, there's a link to my blog down in the comments. This was a fantastic year for the channel, and if you've been watching for a while now, I cannot express how much that means to me. This has been a hobby of mine I've honestly gotten close to walking away from a few times, but the continued feedback and engagement you guys have given me just keeps me going. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I can't wait to continue sharing my thoughts and coming up with cocktails for you all. So what's next? Well, I am participating in Dry January this year, but I'll still be reviewing new movies. Once February rolls around, it's back to the cocktails and reviews, but I also want to try experimenting with other types of videos. Maybe more long-form stuff, maybe some rankings or list videos, and I definitely want to keep watching and reviewing stuff you guys recommend. If you have any ideas for what you want to see from me in 2024, let me know down in the comments, and also let me know what your favorite film of 2023 was. As always, if you'd like to help support the channel, be sure to leave a like and hit the subscribe button. Once again, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Live deliciously, but please remember to drink responsibly. And Happy New Year.